Welcome to BioAfrica again, colleagues. My name is Sia Ndutela from Africa Bio, and our session today is Holistic Regulatory Framework for Unlocking Regional Cannabis Manufacturing. I've got three colleagues of mine, Ms. Mukhadi Fafudi, Advocate Gareth Prince, and we also have Thabo Ramashala in the panel. I will let my panelists do introductions of themselves, and we can then proceed with the day. The order of our day is going to be the panelists will kick in the discussion, the presentation is prepared, and then we'll then do follow-up questions, and some of the questions will come from the audience. So our audience, we request you to then write up questions that I can pose, some of them, not all of them, because they get too many, we have limited time, but we will then, I'll then hand over to our panelists, starting with you, Ms. Mukhadi Fafudi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ntutela, and good morning, colleagues. My name is Mukhadi Daphne Fafudi from SAPRA. I am the Manager in Regulatory Compliance Unit of SAPRA, and I am responsible for cannabis-related matters at the organization, and also in terms of regulatory compliance, my unit is responsible to ensure that there is compliance with the provisions of the Medicines Act. And this is through various ways. And as you know, SAPRA's mandate is to ensure that all health products that are in the market are of quality, safety, and efficacy. So my unit is responsible for overseeing that. I'm a pharmacist by profession with over 20 years of experience in various sectors of pharmacy. And I will start with my presentation because of time limitations. So in terms of cannabis, we know that this is an internationally controlled substance, and we regulate it in terms of the UN Convention of 1961 in terms of narcotic substances, and also in terms of the UN Convention of 1971 in terms of the psychotropic substances. And nationally, the UN member state needs to align with the conventions by developing national frameworks that will ensure that there is compliance with the international requirements. So, and this, the Medicines Act through SAPRA and the National Department of Health, we ensure that we implement measures of control, oversight in this regard. This is in relation to the whole supply chain of medicines and scientific purpose when it comes to cannabis and related substances. And with the intention of prioritizing health and safety and minimizing the diversion. As we know that there is a psychoactive component to this product, therefore we need to ensure that we create a framework that will ensure that the safety of the public. So in terms of the SAPRA framework, we issue licenses, and also in terms of the provision of the Medicines Act, the licenses are for importation, exportation, for cultivation, for manufacturing, distribution locally. And also the products must be registered or authorized in terms of the orthodox framework, complementary framework, or medical devices framework. And this is controlled in terms of Section 22C of the Act. In addition, narcotics and psychotropic substances must obtain a permit in terms of Section 22A9 for use, possession, for sale, supply, manufacturing, and for importation and exportation in terms of Section 22A11. This we're working together with the DG of Health. And what mainly we ensure in terms of quality standard, we need to make sure that all whether it's cultivation, manufacturing, or production of products in relation to the cannabinoids, we need to ensure that they are up to a certain standards. And these standards are defined by the market. So we need to ensure that there are specific standards that are met, they are validated, there's justification of those. At the moment, we are using relevant pharmacopoeia references such as the US, the BP, the European, or also the Japanese monographs. However, we welcome any standards that are available that can be tested for the intended market. And that is how licenses and permits will be issued. So in 2019-2022, following the Concord judgment and also the increase in interest in cannabis industry, we therefore excluded certain products that contained low THC, but with specific also low CBD, where in terms of safety standards were classified as relatively safe, and those that are not making any medicinal claims were allowed into the market for a period of 1 year. And there was an independent study that was conducted. These products were taken from several markets that were authorized, some unauthorized market, and it was found that some of such products that were allowed during that period of a year, when SAPRA was establishing a framework that would be suitable for these products, we found that there was in terms of that study, it noted that there were some contaminants. Then some of the products did not at all have any CBD content in them, and some had even high THC levels. So, and after a year, as that was for the scheduling exclusion was for a year, following a year, what we did is that we therefore introduced a framework that will continue. My slides are not moving. I'm trying to stop sharing and reshare again. Let me see. Okay, it's moving now. So following that year, we amended our schedules, and then, which is currently the framework that is in place, we removed the inscription of cannabis from the schedules. As you remember, it prohibited this from sale. It was Schedule 7. Hemp was also prohibited. So this was with the intention of complying with the Concord judgment. It was also to allow hemp to be available in the market, which is a low THC containing substance. And then, as we know that this will enable the Department of Agriculture to now regulate hemp for industrialization. We know that at the moment, there is the Cannabis Master Plan, which Mr. Ramashala will speak about. Through our schedules amendment, this is what the intention was to do, to remove that restriction in line with the Concord judgment, and also with the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, and also because of the demands. And we know that the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act was still restricting this, but they approached this through the amendment, through the cannabis bill. I hope someone will speak to that. And what we also did is that in terms of CBD, we listed CBD in Schedule 4 or in Schedule Not, depending on the content and also the claims that are made by such products. And you will see with our amendments is that we have therefore allowed for the availability of CBD containing products, either through the complementary framework, either through the framework that is not regulated by health at all, as cosmetics or any other purpose. And this also, the amendment therefore still indicate that should this be for medical purpose, CBD will still be regulated by SAPRA, and therefore a license should be issued in that regard. And I have spoken to this. Agriculture will speak about the framework for hemp for any other purpose other than medical use. And then in terms of our licenses, we have received over 220 licenses for application for medical purpose or scientific. And in this instance, we have issued 32 licenses. Out of the applications that we have received, the 32 that were issued, it is based on their readiness and in terms of their quality management systems that were in place for this purpose. And most of the facilities were not yet ready when we were about to inspect them. they were still establishing quality standards in line with the market that they intend issuing their product to. Okay, and I will allow for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Asafudi. I think what we'll do is that let us go to the next speaker and take questions afterwards. To here to then take us through to his presentation. And then afterwards, we'll go to Advocate Cannabis. Tabo, are you here?
I'm here, facilitator. But
yes, can you give your open remarks? Give us your opening remarks, sir.
Sorry, Chairperson, are you referring to me or the advocate?
Tabo Ramashana.
All right, no, thanks. Let me try to share my screen. Is it visible, Chairperson?
Coming through, yes, it is. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, let me just go into the presentation mode. Right. All right, Chairperson, the good day, and also good day to the other panel members and everyone who is on the platform. My name is Tabo Ramashala, as already indicated. Chairperson, I'm audible. Am I audible, Chairperson?
Yes, you are, sir.
All right. No, thanks. All right, no, thanks. As requested to present on the proposed regulatory framework for unlocking the regional cannabis manufacturing, we just go through the slides. In the interest of time, some of the slides will jump. Firstly, to present update on what is being done regarding the developments in the cannabis industry. Also to give an update on the proposed regulatory framework and identify areas that need intervention by government in order to unlock the economic potential of the cannabis industry. In terms of the current legal status, my colleague Mahadi has already touched on some of this, that in South Africa, we have two pieces of legislation that regulate cannabis, which is the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, as well as the Medicine and Related Substances Act. And those are the two pieces of legislation. The Drugs Act is administered by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, whereas the Medicine Act is at the Department of Health. But the Department of Health, what it has done is changing the schedules for this particular act as regards to cannabis, as well as its compounds. So it has cleared a number of obstacles regarding that particular act. But we still have a challenge with regard to the Drugs Act. There's also a number of legal challenges to it, as well as litigation. But at the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, where I come from, we have amended the regulations of the Plant Improvement Act to provide for the regulation of hemp. And then also there's been work done on the Plant Breeders' Rights Act to provide for the protection of intellectual properties, particularly for the breeders, the innovators, and everyone else who will have contributed towards development of the cultivars and other related technologies. So, but we have identified the need for a new policy and a legislation to provide for the commercialization of cannabis. We'll touch this later. And then in terms of areas that the cannabis master plan is identified to commercialize. It's the medicine side, the industrial side, the food, and the recreational. So in terms of the medicine side, the Department of Health and SAPRA have a legislation in place to regulate this area. And then in terms of industrial, the Department of Agriculture and Reform and Rural Development have made provision in terms of the Plan Improvement Act to regulate certain areas in this particular space. Where we still need, in terms of cannabis, to look is the area of food, because here you have about 3 departments that have a role to play here. You have the Department of Health in terms of the Food and Cosmetics Act. Then you have the Department of Agriculture in terms of the Agricultural Product Standards Act, and then also other food safety regulations. So as well as the liquor, we also have a liquor act that is also here. And then with regard to recreational cannabis, here, that is where you still find the Drugs Act playing a role here. But holistically, if you want to regulate cannabis, these are the 4 areas where you need to have regulatory instrument in place to regulate. And because here we've been requested to present on unlocking the potential for cannabis. So this is the value chain for hemp. And now the focus of the webinar is here, the manufacturing and product development. So and then from here, the opportunities are, cosmetics, the foods, the nutraceuticals, the beverages, the textiles, building material, paper, etc., etc. So this is these are areas around manufacturing that need attention. But of course, manufacturing does not exist alone in the value chain. You have production inputs, you have primary production, and then at the end, you have marketing where you look at local and export market. And the next value chain is I was using hemp as an example, but the value chain for that also look similar. But in terms of regional development and the model for including particularly the smaller growers in the hemp and dagga industry, we have a model like this that we believe can be able to include the growers in the cannabis value chain. What we're proposing is for smaller growers or resource-poor farmers, government or any state-owned entity or donors or even private sector in terms of their corporate social investment, they can put up a central processing facility in a specific area, and then this will then be linked to a number of farmers, and these farmers will bring their product to the central facility. And the role of government here will be to provide seed and other production inputs to these farmers. And in terms of the central processing facility, we said government can provide this, but also you can also have the private sector and other players putting up this central facility. In this way, it will reduce the establishment costs for farmers, where if each and every one of them can put up their processing facility, it's going to be very, very expensive. And again, it may not run at full capacity because of the limited volumes. But if you put it in an area, then we have farmers there, these will be running at almost full capacity. And then you have the products from here can then be referred to manufacturers of various products, wherein then they can do now the final products. Here, private sector can invest here, but government can still also invest here, or even other players. And then from there, they go to the local market as well as export market. And then here, what we are trying to say is whatever legislation we put in place, whatever policy we put in place should take care of the dynamics here. For example, if the central processing facility, how do we deal with the ownership structures? How do we manage the facility? And the same goes here if it's gonna be government owned. So that is our model for developing cannabis industry in most of our areas where farmers are mostly communal farmers. Right. In terms of the effective, the regulatory system, I've taken this pillar from the Cannabis Master Plan. The Cannabis Master Plan indicates the following, that this pillar will focus on developing a new regulatory framework for both hemp and dagga, and the Department of Health will lead this pillar. Some form of legislation that might need to be taken care of. So in that prohibit commercialization of other aspects of cannabis value chain. Secondly, to develop a policy to provide for a new regulatory framework, as well as lastly, to develop a new legislation to regulate the commercialization of cannabis in South Africa. So this is what is there in the master plan. So today's webinar is quite relevant in that space, that there is a pillar in the master plan that talks about exactly that. And then the proposed framework for regulating cannabis is anchored on 3 areas. Firstly, we believe there should be a permit system. What we are saying is that all farmers, growers, and manufacturers will need to get a permit or a certificate in order to participate in the cannabis industry. And then my colleague definitely has touched on the type of permits or licenses, but we believe the key ones should be a permit for production, primary production, and a permit for manufacturing. And then along the value chain, you can see what else need to be taken care of. And then we also believe that there should be protection of the general public, in that what we are saying is that the access to the areas where this cannabis is planted or processed must be controlled at all times. And lastly, monitoring and enforcement. We believe that you need an effective monitoring and enforcement system in terms of increasing compliance levels. If you don't have a monitoring and enforcement system, any piece of legislation will fail. So whatever regulatory framework we as South Africa decide to do ultimately need to be anchored on those. Right, this is my last slide. What we're saying is that the delegates to the webinar are hereby requested to take note of the developments that have been made in establishing the cannabis industry. Also, the developments regarding the proposed regulatory framework for cannabis. And again, we urge anybody who have proposals that you are welcome to make proposals in terms of the implementation and monitoring of the cannabis regulatory framework. Thank you very much, Chairperson. That's my last slide. Thank you. And my contact details are on the screen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramashala. It is quite a very interesting points that you raised. I like the regional model of inclusion that you mentioned, and talk about perhaps as you go forward, because in most instances we also need to take into account not all small farmers can afford every step of the manufacturing value chain, but we'll talk more about that. Now, our next presenter is going to be Advocate Gareth Prince, and who's also going to give his opening remarks on the opening presentation. Over to you then, Gareth. Can you please put down your presentation, my brother, and then over to you, then Dr. Prince.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just have a general discussion for now. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you very much.
Yes.
Loud and clear.
It seems that my computer is somehow, my video is freezing. The topic of this track is a holistic regulatory framework for cannabis to unlock manufacturing potential. We find ourselves nearly 3 years after the Constitutional Court judgment, but we are nowhere close to having a holistic regulatory framework for cannabis. Unfortunately, what we find at present is that there is a lot of dissonance between the different government departments when it comes to the issue of cannabis. So the thinking is not at all holistic, it is silo-based. And in the past 3 years, government have given us a Cannabis for Private Purposes bill, as well as a National Cannabis Master Plan. Unfortunately, both of these documents were stillborn. The Cannabis for Private Purposes bill, primarily because there was no adequate public participation in the conceptualization as well as the formulation of the bill. Our law is quite clear that when new legislation or when a new regulatory framework is developed, that the community that the legislation is going to affect the most must have a say in the conceptualization and the formulation in the bill. So they must have adequate input into the bill. We do understand that for the past 18, 20 months that we've had this whole COVID episode, but it was 19 months expired before COVID-19 hit our shores. And in that 19 months, there was absolutely no consultation on the part of government with, or should I rather say very little consultation on the part of government with the cannabis community. Cannabis for Private Purposes bill, the name of the bill itself is a contradiction in terms, because whereas the Constitutional Court is quite entitled to have found unconstitutionality on one ground, it is the legislator's purpose and duty to develop a cannabis law that will encompass every aspect of citizens' lives. We cannot afford to have the Department of Trade and Industry draw up a separate bill for commercialization, or we cannot have the Department of Agriculture draw up a separate bill for hemp or for cannabis for cultivating it. We need one cannabis act or cannabis bill that can quite easily accommodate all of these aspects. And the solution in this regard is actually quite simple. And it would seem that it is so simple that the government tend to think that it is not real. But what we need to do in order to unlock the bottleneck that currently exists is to deschedule cannabis out of the Drugs Act and out of the Medicines Act. There is nothing in law that prevents us from doing that. Neither does international law treaties prevent us from doing so. We need to understand that the Constitution is the supreme law of this country. And my court case immediately plunged South Africa in violation of international law treaties, because what the Constitutional Court ordered is in violation of the bill. But that didn't mean that the Constitutional Court could not make that order, because our Constitution is the supreme law of our land. And if our constitutional norms, values, and rights dictate that citizens may use cannabis, then that is what the law dictates. And equality, which is one of the fundamental rights in our Constitution, dictates that cannabis cannot be regulated more stricter than alcohol and or tobacco. We must understand that neither alcohol or tobacco, which are dangerous and very addictive substances, are regulated by the Drugs Act, neither by the Medicines Act. So there's no need to develop a new regulatory framework, because precedent already exists in the manner in which especially alcohol is regulated. So one is baffled as to why government has taken this long in order to come up with an acceptable regulatory framework. Currently, the laws that exist does not facilitate access into the industry. Medicinal cannabis, for all intents and purposes, does not exist, because despite the fact that SAPRA managed to, or that Parliament actually managed to pass this law one day before our Constitutional Court hearing was held, the confirmation hearing, medical cannabis is not available for the majority of the people within South Africa. Those within the cannabis community that wants to cultivate it, the entry fee and the criteria that growers have to meet in order is way out of the reach of the average cannabis user or the cannabis manufacturer. So therefore, it is not very effective. We have a national cannabis master plan that does not speak towards recreational cannabis, that does not seem to have a plan for recreational cannabis. So in order to get us away from this bottleneck, and in order to ensure that we move forward with haste, we are well within our rights to deschedule cannabis from the Drugs Act, to deschedule cannabis from the Medicines Act, and to ensure that the lead departments with regard to the regulation of cannabis is the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, as well as the Department of Science and Innovation. These and also agriculture. These are the departments that must take the lead. And also the great fear. So despite the fact that there's nearly 3 years have developed and we do not have a regulatory framework, what we do have is the fact that nearly 500,000 people were arrested after the Constitutional Court judgment. So there is no freedom of cannabis as of yet. There is no cannabis industry. There is no empowering of those who have fought for the right to be free in relation to cannabis. And the blame for that, unfortunately, must be laid fairly and squarely in front of our government departments. The Department of Justice have failed to have any interaction with the cannabis community for the past 3 years. The Department of Health, as well as SAPRA, keeps on clinging to the idea that they are the ones that need to regulate cannabis, when in December 2020, the Gauteng High Court declared that for all intents and purposes, most of the products that are currently labeled under complementary medicines, which would technically speaking also include cannabis as well as African traditional or indigenous medicines, need not be regulated by the Medicines Act, because for all intents and purposes, they are not medicines as defined by the Act. So there are no axiomatic reasons as to why the Medicines Act or SAPRA, as well as the Department of Justice, must take the lead in relation to the regulation of cannabis. In South Africa, currently, what the government is proposing in terms of the National Cannabis Master Plan is to use hemp for the industrial purposes. And that's the building of houses, the making of clothes, panels for cars. They want to use hemp for that. However, hemp is not indigenous to South Africa. Why should we not make use of what we have, which is indigenous land-raised cannabis, a variety that has climatized to our conditions, and that's quite hardy, and that grows like a weed. The government does not want us to do that because they do not seem to have a plan for the dacha that we have fought for all of these years. And the solutions in this regard, there's nothing that prevents us from working with land-raised cannabis in order to fulfill medicinal cannabis needs, in order to fulfill industrial cannabis needs, as well as to fulfill recreational cannabis needs. We need to regulate not in the ground when substances are still in the ground, but after they've been harvested at the end, because the technology that currently exists allows us to take what Ma'am Daphne called the psychoactive properties out of cannabis in order to use it for industrial purposes. The international treaties even allow us to do that. But ladies and gentlemen, I think the most important reason has to do with the dignity of South Africans and the fact that our government, and especially the Department of Health, SAPRA, and the Department of Justice, continue to view cannabis through the lens of the West. The government does not want to embrace the fact that cannabis presents the most viable opportunity for South Africans to get out of the economical quagmire that they find themselves in, the poverty and the hopelessness and the joblessness that South Africans currently find themselves in. And cannabis presents the best opportunity. We're not saying that it is a panacea to all of the problems that we have, but one is hard pressed to find any substance that has the ability to put South Africans to work in the manner that cannabis does. And really, there is, apart from the apathy and the inability to embrace holism when it comes to the issue of cannabis, our government need to work with its people. They need to embrace its people. They need to embrace its natural resources. In order to regulate cannabis in the strict manner that Mr. Thabo Ramashala mentioned, and the fact that cannabis must be strictly controlled, there's no scientific or evidentiary base for that. Cannabis is much, much, much less dangerous than alcohol or tobacco. It's much, much less dangerous than several medicines that are currently labeled as Scheduled 0, and that's being sold in shops. Why should cannabis be more onerously regulated by these? Why is it that we need to spend hundreds and thousands and millions of rands in trying to develop a new regulatory framework for cannabis when these frameworks already exist? Cannabis can seamlessly fit into existing regulatory framework, and thereby lots of resources would be able to free it up, and also South Africans would be able to start getting to work with what we currently have. And that is where we need to be going, and we need to have started yesterday. And the sooner government gets to interact with the cannabis community, because here we have an opportunity to develop a new social compact for a new sunrise industry, which is cannabis. The government needs to work with its people because cannabis is the people's plant. However, the current regulatory framework that we have is exclusionary. It is not inclusive. And one of the most fundamental legal principles in our new constitutional order is the notion of reasonable accommodation. South Africans might not agree with cannabis, and we are not advocating that everybody should start using cannabis. But South African society must accept that they would have to reasonably accommodate the cannabis community, and that they would be able, and that they cannot accommodate us on more stringent levels than they accommodate the alcohol community or the tobacco community. That is the very essence of equality. The very fact that we in South Africa, our smoking plant for hundreds of years were cannabis. It wasn't tobacco. However, the usage of tobacco and alcohol is something that is quite inculcated in the culture of our former down presses, and it's ingrained in Western culture. But that is not our culture. That was the source of our downpression. We need to be proud of what it is that we have, and we need to be working with that in order to put South Africans to work, in order to unlock the manufacturing potential. And one other thing that I need to say is that when we talk about unlocking regional manufacturing potential, it is about what cannabis can do for South Africa and for this region and on the continent. In terms of international treaties, there is provision within the international treaties. It's called an inter se agreement, whereby members of international conventions could amongst themselves come together and decide that they will have a different regime amongst them in relation to, for instance, like cannabis, which is prohibited, but members can decide that they can have an alternative regime if they agree amongst themselves that that is what they want to do. And that presents a very good option for South Africa and for our region in order to work with cannabis within the current international law framework.
Thank you, Advocate Prince. You said a mouthful and very thought-provoking issues, and I'm sure your colleagues in the panel would want to respond to some of them, but time is not on our side. So what I'm going to do is, to be fair to our audience, I'm going to start with a question that have been raised by our listeners within the convention. The first question is addressed to Thabo Ramashala. The question is this a cooperative model? I think they are talking about the same regional model of inclusion that I mentioned earlier on. The question that is a cooperative model, and will the products be under one brand if it were to be established, and if there's a model that government thinks it will work? How will this work? That's a question from the audience. Thabo?
All right, thank you. Yeah, I was struggling to unmute myself. Yeah, I think what we are proposing is that this will be a cooperative model.
Can you switch on your video for the sake of the audience?
Oh, okay.
We're live. Go ahead.
Am I visible?
Yes, visible and audible. Please answer. Please go ahead, Thabo.
All right. Yeah. Come again. Yes. Am I not visible? I mean, audible?
You are audible and
facilitator.
Please go ahead. You're audible.
Come again.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. The model, it is true, is a cooperative model for managing the processing plant. But at the primary production, each farmer or each grower will manage their operations. So they only come together at the processing facility. There we are proposing a cooperative model, but of course with government involvement, so that at least everyone stick to the terms of reference that they might have agreed to. But that is the model we're proposing. It's a cooperative model. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm trying to check if there's another question. While we're looking at the audience question, my question, and I suppose it goes to you and to Mukhadi. Are we likely to see a convergence of these divergent views that I can pick up here in order for us as a country to start to put this? I mean, nobody is denying the fact that we're sitting on gold when it comes to the potential of cannabis from the manufacturing point of view. I would like to see a convergence of thoughts and views in getting us to one legislation, or at least the pseudo legislation that talks to the different parties.
Yeah,
if that version. Mukhadi?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Ramashala, for presenting. What I want to say is that SAPRA actively participates in various stakeholder forums, and in every engagement, we reiterate that we are willing to be part of the bigger solution, because together we can make a change. And the presentation that Mr. Ramashala was showing in relation to cannabis for medical purpose, for the farmers, it's a model that jointly we were working on with other stakeholders such as the DSI and many other stakeholders, where we said, how can we provide an enabling mechanism for the communal farmers or farmers. However, at the same time, not disabling the one that works for the other people, looking at the matters of affordability and previously disadvantaged, and also considering that there is a market that exists in the illegitimate market that needs to be formalized. Those are the engagements that we are actively having, and SAPRA has expressed that it is willing to assist, provided, remember, it's about quality and safety for the public. So if we do it in such a manner whereby our researchers are holding hands with our farmers, SAPRA will be in making sure that the public is safe from that regard. And then the legislation will be developed around that. I'm sorry, due to time, I may not have emphasized that because I knew Mr. Ramashara was going to speak about it, because it is on his on the master plan on the master plan as well. So, but yeah, we will get there working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, ma'am. Just one last question, I suppose.
Chairperson, can I also add?
Okay. You can switch off the video.
The convention.
Yes. Go ahead.
Is the video not all right?
Yeah, keep it
off. What I'm
off.
saying is that convergence is already there in the form of this interdepartmental committee on cannabis. That is an attempt to say we will ultimately have one piece of legislation regulating cannabis as far as commercialization is concerned, and the same goes with regard to the implementation and in terms of how the various aspects of the regulatory framework are implemented. So there's that convergence of thought currently, but we're working towards the practical integration of some of the functions that regard to cannabis. Thank you.
Thank you to my panel. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, and we talk the whole day on the subject. It's a very interesting subject, and I'm now being told that our time is almost up. So let me take this time to thank our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Ramashara, and for your input, and like the model, it seems from the audience I can pick up. And thank you, Advocate Gareth Prince. You know, you've traveled this road to this far. Our hope is that eventually we're able to all then get to a point where we agree on what needs to happen. And lastly, to Sis Mukhadi Fafundi from SAPRA, thank you very much. Your views on how eventually we have to go forward, because the ultimate of it is that SAPRA as a body entrusted with those responsibilities has to come on board. And I like the fact that the discussion amongst all the parties is happening much as we are still where we are. We are hoping that eventually it will lead to some fruits. So, panelists and audience, thank you very much. And let's see each other again on another session that is coming soon. Goodbye.